Kalpa. Welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast. How are you doing?
Doing lovely. Thanks, Josh. How are you?
Oh, great. Any day that I get to talk to leadership with someone that's as passionate about that as me is a great day.
Likewise.
I think a great place to start is if you could take the time to define to the listeners who you are.
Sure. So I am right now the CEO of a consulting and coaching company, which helps leaders, conscious leaders, create trauma-informed workplaces. And a little bit about that backstory is I experienced childhood sexual abuse, and I reached a point in my career in corporate life where I was very disconnected, and I sort of felt like I hit my rock bottom as the mom of a 3-year-old leading a large global team, as well as in financial services. And I just didn't know, like, there was something wrong, and I didn't know what was exactly wrong because I felt like I completely was lacking intimacy and, trust in many of my relationships. So that led me down the path of transformation for the last few years. And I'm at a very beautiful place where, through the help of many coaches and many other things, I've been able to turn my pain into purpose. And really, that's
I
why
love
I'm
that.
here. I help others lead fully connected lives.
Pain into purpose. I wrote that down. I love that. I've never heard that before.
It,
And
it-
that's so beautiful.
it's one of my coaches, Michael Seaver, who you might know. Like,
I
he was
love Michael. Yeah.
Michael, right? And there are different ways people put it. Like, what's your message in the mess? Pain to purpose. Like, all. I don't know who originally coined the term, but I love that, and I think that's what most of us are doing here, right? Trying to help somebody who is going through same experiences that we went through in our
Mm.
younger years.
I think everyone that I have on my podcast, and that's why I love this, is leadership is it's malleable. There's not a perfect definition behind it. I would love to hear kind of from your perspective, how do you define leadership? And has it changed over the years? So as you've kind of grown and matured, is your definition of leadership grown?
Absolutely. My definition of leadership has grown, but some of the core elements of what I consider a leader, I think they have stayed the same.
Mm.
Um, so number one for me, leadership is inherent, that you have the courage to actually have tough conversations. And because I truly believe hard conversations lead to an easier life versus easy conversations. Really, you're pushing the
Yeah.
the can down the road, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, for me, it's in there's compassion in leadership, right? So
Mm.
compassion for not just having tough conversations, but also with how we have the conversation. When you're having a conversation, honest conversation, people, the intent shouldn't be to break people. It is really to understand, where they want to go and help them in that path. And so often I see people, yes, you got to have tough conversation, honest conversation, but somehow that conversation turns into meanness, and that is not in my definition. That's not leadership, right? That breaks people. And so those are two for me. And trust is a big one. Trust is a component of leadership. Is it's Do you know the people you're leading? And for me, leadership, when I say trust, it doesn't matter what level, right, in the
Mm.
organization or hierarchy. It is about, do we know about the people that we are leading, and do people that we work with, do they know us, to be able to lead them into a certain steer them into a certain direction? Or sometimes you don't even have to do that. You just have to create the environment where people can have that open communication, and be together. So those are the three that I, in my definition, that today, they have stayed consistent. There was a point where, I would say, I don't know how much I believed, but if I'm being honest, I don't know that I lived fully like a leader, because I would question myself. Sometimes I
Mm.
would if there is a really very senior leader from a higher, and I worked in a financial services, right? So even though in private, like I was very vocal, but there are times where depending on the organization you are, if it's very top down, sometimes
Yeah.
just go with the flow, and you're like, okay, this is how people are, we can't
I'm
change
in the
it.
military. Yeah, I understand that.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. And some of my clients are like veterans, so I totally understand that as well. And um, but what I have realized over the time is just that I think it is even more important that we speak truth to power, especially if we have to
Mm.
be successful as a leaders, because when you don't stand up for your beliefs and values, you pretty much lose respect for your own self in that situation, so let alone other people respecting you. Right? So and there are sometimes some leadership cultures where it's the person who's always yes is the one who's rewarded, but I think those things have changed and evolved, so I have very strong views on the kind
Yeah.
of leadership that we need today and what I believe in.
I so much of that is I love that. So unreasonable is part of kind of my house of leadership. I think every leader has to be able to be courageous and stand up and speak up when there's something wrong, if there's a better way of doing something. But it takes a confidence. And like you even said it too, is like almost an imposter syndrome. Sometimes as leaders, we don't feel confident in our abilities. And I think we all have all had that. You mentioned something that I really want to kind of start digging into, which is trust. I I think trust is one of it's I had a guest on Oak McCulloch. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, and he brought up this term that I love is that leaders' currency is trust. Trust is the currency that a leader deals out. And that's how I think we build authentic, true relationships. How can a leader build trust from your perspective? And then how can they use that to build a positive culture within their organization?
Yeah, I wish I had cracked the code on that. I'm still
Me too.
learning every single day, right? I think as we grow and evolve, we learn something. But the fundamental things on trust is, you and I speak from a multicultural lens because I grew up
And
in
I love
India.
that.
I moved here, like I'm a U.S. citizen now. The mom of a 9-year-old, right, and boy, and living in Arizona now, in Texas, and working in global teams like two industries, healthcare, financial services primarily, and now running my own business. Trust, to me, the foundation of that is our openness, our curiosity, and
Mm,
willingness to know something new about the other person or other than my beliefs, right? So at the foundation is that, so if for somebody to trust, they have to know me. I have to know you, Josh, that you are this really disciplined person, who has very regimented schedule to be able to
yeah.
live up to your commitments fully, like running the podcast, having your military career, being a loving husband, father. Like, I know a little bit about you, you know a little bit about me. That then brings us to I like you, that to have this conversation, and that liking then leads to trust. Right now, you can just simply that, liking to that, that trust can, and sometimes it can take long.
Yeah.
So the things that really, in my experience, that really helps build trust quickly is that vulnerability, sometimes to be able to share with people who we are,
Mm,
like why we are there, and are we even aligned in that mission, are we which way we are headed. So unless a leader like is willing to have that conversation there, it is like about themselves, about why we are together, and find that common purpose. It's hard to build trust. And I've been in rooms where when we have asked, do you believe you have high trust? And pretty much 95% of the room has raised high, hands.
Oh,
And I
wow.
know as a leader, that's not true, right?
That's not true at all.
That's not true. But I had huge respect for my boss at the time, because two of us were probably the only ones, or I could count the number on my, right hand, right?
Mm,
Who raised the hand that no, there is trust, lack trust deficit. So, and my favorite, I think, and I want to make sure I attribute correctly, but I think it's Covey, Stephen Covey. Um,
Stephen Covey, yeah.
yeah, there, one of the workshops we had done, really, that we run at the speed of trust, right? So
Mm,
really, for building trust, the key elements are to be able to know you, to like you, to be able to trust you. And communication, open communication, sharing about each other, learning a little bit about yourself. I think those are core element. I did talk about curiosity. In my experience living in different cultures, I think we have so much judgment about, this is how, Texans are, this is how,
mm,
Californians are, or, this is how America is, this is how, India is, or China is, Russia is. What we forget is, sometimes people are not so black and white of just one nationality, one identity. They have certain roots. They might have
mm.
mixed heritage. People's family history might be different, and their upbringing might be different, right? So I find across cultures, right, many different, cultures, the basic things that people need are very similar. Like
Mm,
food at the table, a roof over their head, good education for their kids, good
yeah.
loving relationships, right? Some, hopefully some, ways where they can, have social upward mobility for their or family. And oftentimes our judgments around how people are on our close-mindedness about, or rather our fear of being rejected, stops us from even making that attempt and showing a little bit of who we are, and learn about the other person to find some commonality that we can trust each other.
So I love that. And part of being in the military, it's a cursing and a blessing in a way, is because I'm getting ready to transition jobs that I've been on for 7 months, and 4 months I'm going to start another job with another team. One of the blessings from being in the military is the ability to have to build relationships so quickly, and it's also a curse because you build these relationships, and when you build them, you become almost emotional in a way of,
Mm.
you build such a deep connection with individuals, and then you have to do it again and do it again and do it again. And that's the difference, I think, from being a civilian and civilian leadership versus in the military leadership, is that we are moved around so often, especially as junior non-commissioned officers and junior officers, that is a superpower that a lot of us, I don't think, fully embrace, is our ability to build authentic relationships. And I see leadership as a bridge, and each phase on that bridge we have to build out. And if we don't build out each phase i- intentionally, then as we continue, our bridge will eventually crumble because the foundation's not there. One of those tenets is strengthening relationships. And I love what you said about building trust and knowing who on your team. So when I was in command, I would practice the three rule. So every day I would go and I would meet three soldiers that I didn't know very well, and I would have 15 to 20-minute conversation with them every single day, and it was about just building some kind of like authentic vulnerability with them, because from my standpoint, they probably view me as a company commander and they don't want to talk to me. So I'm going to force that conversation because I want to build that kind of connection. And throughout my leadership experience, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is I've realized there's two ways to build an authentic relationship. And it's either through a crucible event or through frequency. So you can build a very strong relationship with someone in a very rapid period of time. If you're going through a crucible event, and in the civilian world, maybe you're going through a training exercise, or maybe you're going through a downturn in your business. In the military, you're going through an actual operational exercise, or you spend so much time with people, especially at work. If Kalpa, if I'm working with you almost every single day, you and I are probably naturally going to become really good friends because we share a lot of our core values. And
Mhm.
I kind of call that the rule of the tribe. The top 5 people that you spend the most time with, you actually start inheriting their traits and their states because we have those same kind of core values, those shared beliefs.
Yes, 100%. And so back to your the point you made and the question that how do you build trust quickly? I say for me, it's a little bit of consistency,
Yeah.
what to expect, right? And that could be short, frequent. And I take the example of with my son too, like, that like as children, like how do they know that they are secure attachment, like with the mom, like or I use the term mom loosely. There could be dads who are, the single parents like raising, right? But it's that
Yeah.
mirroring, like, you feel an emotion, I'm there and I see that in you, your joy or you're sad, and I'm mirroring that back, and that
Yeah.
builds that empathy. It's the same thing when we are with people, right? When as we are going about in their days, that consistency, or maybe it's small frequency, like I'm seeing you as a colleague, maybe I'm having a coffee in the morning, or if I'm on Zoom calls, like I'm every morning I'm just checking in with you how you are, and you feel, you sense people's energy. At least that's how
Mm.
I feel sometimes, even before they say a word, like, so through those interactions, the more you're really able to say what's not what you're feeling, sometimes like read in between the line, right?
Yeah.
Right. And having that frequency, like, it allows you to then see what's going on, because sometimes, like and that makes it easier to then build relation. At the end of the day, if you, whether in military especially, because there your life could really be in a threat, right? And
Yeah.
more often in civilian situations, we are always thinking of that tiger or the war that's not there, right? We
Yeah.
are just running from our hyper active, defense kind of mechanisms like fight or flight. But in military, the cost could be high, right? So in those cases, the frequent interactions is the easiest way. The other is you bring people together and you do
Mhm.
some common team building, right? But then the team building, really, that the focus on some common activities, because then there's a common mission, and through the course of that, right, you are able to get to know each other a little bit
Yeah.
more, and yeah.
You're dropping so many great nuggets. So another thing that you said that I absolutely love is mirror. So I'm a weirdo. I like to journal about leadership, and you can ask my wife. Is I have my thinking chair behind me, and I try to deliberately spend 1 hour a day, 30 minutes in the morning reading, and 30 minutes in the evening, kind of journaling on this. One of the rules that I've kind of learned is the rule of mirrors, and you beautifully summed that up. Is that as a leader, that we are a reflection of our organization in a way. Our leaders, we emulate the same states and traits, but our team will do the same thing. So there's a quote that I've lived by ever since I was a lieutenant and I first saw this and I just consumed it. Is we are what we repetitively do. Excellence then isn't an act, it's a habit, by Aristotle. And I've always had that kind of mentality. Whenever I go in, I think of myself as a literal mirror shining on my organization, and whatever reflection is there, is that something that is true and authentic to myself. So the rule of mirrors is that your organization, whatever you go out and say, deeds and words, is going to be reflected back to you. So are
Mhm.
your deeds and words aligning with who you are as a leader? Beautifully said. And I wanted to make sure that we go back to that. And another thing that you said that is so true is being consistent. So it kind of goes back to the deeds and words. I had a brigade commander tell me that one time on a live fire exercise. We just did absolutely horrible. And we were talking about all these ways that we can improve. And he just simply said, deeds, not words. At the end of the day, leaders, I think extraordinary leaders, have the ability to say all the right things, but their deeds align with their words, their actions align with what they're saying. I'd like to kind of go back to the beginning of your leadership journey. What drove you or inspired you to become a coach?
Yeah, so I told you like when I was disconnected, but I didn't share the thing fully. So after I left my corporate job about 4 years ago, one of the corporate jobs where I had spent nearly a decade, I went through this epiphany that I hadn't dealt with my childhood trauma, and some of the trauma patterns were showing up in my work. So as a first time leader a few years prior, my performance tanked, like, whether it's communication, whether it's followership, like I got really tough feedback,
Mm,
and I wanted to turn things around, and I did. But then eventually what I found is that the environment was becoming very toxic with all the
yeah.
manipulation and just the way people were being measured. And I would ask for raises for people, and then eventually they would get moved with like 15% raises versus I'd been asking, advocating, and they wouldn't be given, and I would get the feedback. So there was a little bit of practice, if whatever was going on. And I left at the time, but I really was in this victim mindset, right?
Mm,
And like things were happening to me, and I wanted to take it on
mm,
me to fix this or that person or situation so it doesn't happen to anyone. What I realized is that was not my path. I was taking like some of the survivors, like that thing on, doing everything, giving everybody a lot of grace, and I wasn't giving that grace to me. And after a lot of soul searching,
mm,
this was around the time when I also had a coach, and I created the company, right? Like, what's next for Kalpa? Create connection, because I was feeling disconnected. But it wasn't until I wasn't ready at the time to coach, right? And in fact, until a year or two ago, right, I was like, coach, what do you mean? Like, I always had this thing in me, healing presence,
yeah.
and I would be very good at like connecting emotionally, reading it between the line, and having these conversations. But I didn't see myself as a coach, right? So I took another job, and that company did a restructuring, and that allowed me the opportunity at the time to go, you know what, like, this is it. I mean, I am being steered by the universe to go down this path.
Yeah.
And that's where I then shared my story. One of the things, I hadn't told my childhood trauma story to anybody, not even my husband, who I had been married for almost 15, 16 years at the time, right?
Wow.
Yeah, not like, I had told only probably a few people, like, but not in anyone in my family. So
Mm,
it's really in my 40s that I started sharing. I shared with my parents. I shared with my last year around this time, my grandma passed away, and I think that
mm,
opened the door for like having a lot of detailed conversation within the family. That, I think, was a blessing in the gift, my grandma's gift, my intergenerational, trauma, like break that trauma in the family. And a lot of my supporters, people that in my personal board of advisors, other coaches, they were like, okay, Kalpa, in leadership, when you were leading people, what did you do? I would say, hey, coaching, supporting, delegating, or like depending on the situation. They're like, so why do you have resistance on coaching? Like, coaching is a key part of leadership. And until
yeah.
they put it that way, I didn't see it that way. Right?
Mm,
So and then I actually was urged by a lot of people to say, you've given us so much of nuggets that you should seriously consider this. And that's how I went down that path. And so I still have like consulting clients, but even coaching. But and sometimes when you're working with executives, those sessions, more than solving the problem, it becomes like a coaching session. Right?
yeah, exactly.
So that's how I really steered that way. And yeah.
The Army recently started a program that's called the Army Coaching Program, and it's really a DoD wide net between the Air Force and the Navy and the DoD organizations. And what they're trying to do is to establish a coaching culture within the organization. And I think you and I kind of had like a similar path, almost kind of getting drawn
Mhm.
into coaching. Is that I first knew that I loved doing it when I was an observer coach trainer at Fort Polk, Louisiana, being able to train large organizations getting ready to go to war or do whatever the mission had them do. And then I kind of just stumbled. I would say that, I was provided an opportunity into the Army coaching program to where I could align my passion with it. And coaching is so true of what you just said, integral into leadership. It is woven into the fibers of great organizations. And I think it starts because it's about asking powerful questions. And I'd love to pause there and see if you could define to the listeners, the coaching process. Because I think if you can understand that, it's such a beautiful way and a toolkit for you as a leader, especially if you're coming into a new organization. And just to share a quick story with you, so I'm an acquisition officer now, but I'm an infantry officer by trade. Almost every single day I put a coaching hat on because I don't necessarily know from a technical standpoint a lot of the, conversations that my team is having. But in order for me to better understand, and because I don't know, I humble myself. I eat some humble pie, as one of my guests would say, and I ask powerful questions. And that when you ask those powerful questions, it starts poking holes, and then you can learn, and then you can grow. So how do you define the coaching process?
Well, so this coaching process for me has been a spiritual journey, honestly,
Mm,
right? Entrepreneurship and coaching, because it's a lot of, and not everybody is coachable. I'll say that up front. Also,
yeah, that's
I, I
true.
have I have I have come to appreciate that through years of just work experience and like as a
Yeah.
coach myself now. For me, it's a like the typical process that I would go take my clients through is really getting very clear on their vision, right? Like, where are
Mm,
we going? Because most people, they're unhappy about something. They're like, I don't like this, I don't like that. You ask what we want to do, and everybody, would say what I don't want, and including me. That's how it starts, right? And then getting very clear on your values, right? Like, what are, because you know we always have goals around what we are doing, but goals are not achievable unless we actually see our being, like how are we going to be in that future, who are we becoming, right?
yeah.
And operating from that perspective. And I sort of kind of want to bring in this story from my early career, where when I was a manager and I was looking for like and becoming a people leader, um, I was told I'm not ready. And I was like, what do you mean I'm not ready? Now I know what that means, because I was self-guessing, right?
Mm,
Self-doubting, right? Like, so because when you are ready, you're already operating at that level, not seeking permission from anybody, but versus, we ourselves are. So coaching in my process, it's getting very clear of where you are going and
yeah.
who is that you're becoming, right? And it is not for the faint hearted, but a lot of people come to coaching where where everything else that they have tried fails, right? It's almost like a crisis they
Yeah.
can't get through, and that's when they come. And I wish, like, at least the learning in my career has been that hopefully like more people, I think, as they start work experience, no matter what the field is, they get coaching, because we are taught, as a children, like to follow certain path, go down this path, career, and go to college. But then when you enter professional relationship, or whether it's a marriage or whether being a parent, you don't have life skills of how to navigate, like how to grow. Like, technology is changing, so much is happening. So really, to sum it up, from a coaching perspective, it's a common theme with my clients are like, oh, I didn't see that possibility. It's this choice is like an either or, right? And then you start questioning, how else can you see yourself, being this way, or having these things, or like whatever your goal is. It starts, those questions are what prompts that, that imagination, that creativity, that hope, right? That they might have lost.
Yeah. I I agree with you 100%, but it's funny you say it's not for the faint of heart. So Ranger School, they have a big sign right as you show up, not for the weak or faint of heart. And I think coaching is very foreign to people because what we do is we don't necessarily like provide solutions. And as a leader, you're not always necessarily providing solutions, but what you're doing is you're asking a powerful question, and you're allowing that question to marinate in that individual team member or in your client or the leader that you're kind of coaching, and then you're actively listening. And as a leader, I think that's a very powerful tool that is often overlooked, especially in toxic leaders that I've worked for. They never want to, I guess, consume. They always want to produce in a
Yep.
way. They always want to talk. They always want to talk. But I've seen great leaders, and one thing is true with every great leader is they're quiet. But when they talk, the entire room listens to them because what they say carries so much weight. And so they ask a powerful question and they listen to all the answers. They consume the information. They allow that, and it's a term, if you ever heard it, like pregnant pause.
Mm-hmm.
They allow that pregnant pause, like 2 seconds, right, to kind of mature. And then they reaffirm, like, all right, this is what you're telling me. This is what I think. Asking another powerful question, kind of going even deeper. And then when you're doing that, that's where the magic happens. I had J.R. Flatter, one of my mentor coaches who actually helped me through this whole process, is that's where the miracle of coaching happens, is what after you ask that powerful question, you're reaffirmed. And then now you're looking for the whisper. You're looking for those subtle hints of that you found the root cause, and then you'll have that aha moment. I love coaching when you can actually get that aha moment in a way, but that is a process that the listeners right now, if you can use that tool, that's a new weapon in your arsenal. Ask a powerful question, actively listen, allow that pregnant pause to set in, reaffirm with empathy, look for the whispers in the room, and then act. I could not agree with you more. That I think that's a beautiful summary of coaching. I kind of want to continue on your leadership journey. So you identified that you wanted to go be a coach. You started this process. When did you find your spark? And I kind of define the spark as the moment that you discovered your true purpose, like that this is it, and you're all in.
So that probably there's one moment that stands out, right? I was in a session at one of the women's kind of networks, and that a few days prior to that, I was driving back, and I was in Phoenix back then. I still remember the signal right before our home, and as I'm driving, I had this overwhelming like sense, like I hadn't shared with the family or anyone, right? And it just, or maybe I did, I had just shared it with everybody, and I was like debating whether I truly really want to coach women, who are sexually abused or like trauma. Like, I'm not a therapist, my education is in economics. I'm a product like leader, I've done
Mm,
fraud risk, I've done consulting, like you name it, like all of those, hard, uh, skills, right?
yeah,
But I'm not like, and I won't even say coaching is a soft skill. I believe in coaching. I've had like probably more than 5 coaches in the last decade at different points, right?
yeah.
But I just wasn't sure I am the one. So my purpose though became clear as I was driving. This overwhelming sense came and
Mm,
it said, and I still remember, like, I got teary eyed and goosebumps, and I was driving. Like, I help sexually abused children and women
mm,
claim their power, live with joy, use their voice, and create a kinder world. And if one thing I want to change, right, that statistic, that average age at which most people share their childhood sexual abuse is like 52 years. Can you imagine, like, living half your life or almost all your life and not sharing? And I
yeah,
believe, like 1 in 4, like it's not, I believe it's data, like 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before they are 18 years of 18 years. And I believe for men that statistic is absolutely underreported because there's even deeper shame in men, and also
yeah.
we are told to be tough, right? So really, that is the moment I remember that became clear. And when I shared that with my coach, she's like, Kalpa, like, are you feeling
Mm,
it? Can you say that, like, how big that is, like, that purpose. So I literally had to sit with it, like feel all the emotions, and then basically say that's it. But in terms of, like how I'm not so married to the form, right? Like that I coach individuals or companies. Like my mission is to break down, like impact 100 million lives in 10 years and break down, the cycle. Because if 1 in 4 adults globally are sexually abused, like people that are living on this planet, like by any estimate, it's like close to 2 billion people, right? And in 10 years, depending on the population growth, it's a big, like even from a business opportunity, like why would you not solve this problem that is
Yeah.
leading people to lead disconnected life? And in military, or in other cases, like all the other additional trauma that that our environments cause. So I think a combination of these series of things that led me to realize my spark, but that moment was the one, right? And particularly when one of my clients heard me speak at something, and the message she sent, like I was the one, right? She needed to work with me, and I felt like so fully like aligned
Mm.
in working with her, and we continue that relationship till date. So I think that was very reaffirming.
I could see it in your eyes, like, as you're talking through that, the passion it's just infectious, like, I can see that, I have a similar journey when I kinda had mine, I got emotional in a way because it all stemmed from soldiers and suicide and depression, like, I wanted to break that cycle. The
Yeah.
Carl Jung has a famous quote, it says, "What we resist persists." So what we resist persists, and you have to confront that. Like, I think I can't remember the statistic you threw out, 57 or 53 years living life and not being able to, like, call it out. So what you're doing, in my mind, is you created alignment, and you said it too. I had a good friend of mine that I brought on the podcast, Jerry St. Pierre. He's a chaplain, in the military, and he talks about how you can truly make a difference is creating alignment. So your head,
Hmm.
heart, and hands. Head, you see it. You understand there's a problem, you identify it. Then you have an emotional alignment. You have that passion, you have that burning desire, the fire of God to go out and do what you need to do. And then when you create your head and heart alignment, your hands are going to want to go do it. It's the same concept I think of inspiring people through leadership by building a vision. And your vision of impacting 100 million lives in 10 years. I look at mine, I want to impact 1 million soldiers in 10 years. And now I think I need to bump up my numbers. If you will go back to the Wolf of Wall Street, those are rookie numbers. I got to
Well,
bump my numbers up.
let's inspire each other, right? But like I think the point is, your goal has to be a little bit something, right? Like the meaningful,
Mm,
right? Like and who knows how much we do, but I truly believe that is the potential, right? Like, it's a and the point of this is not like to serve our egos. The point of
no.
this is that we need, this is a big problem, and there's a
Yeah.
reason. Josh, you are thinking about folks in soldiers, and I'm thinking about people that have been abused. The common piece is trauma. Like, people are carrying a lot of trauma on this planet. Our world is designed by trauma, and that is
Mm,
part of the reason the trust is broken. And it is so essential for the healthy functioning of a society, a world, that we build that trust. And there are different ways of coming at that problem, right? And so it's creating that awareness, finding those partners, strategic, centers of influences, where so that we can collectively, create a better future for our kids.
yeah, that's all it's about is I thought about that when I was journaling. Why is leadership so passionate to me? And if my son and daughter were to join the military, walk through my path, which is probably a high probability, because I know that it inspires my children
Yeah.
for what I do. I don't want them to have a poor leader. I want to shape future leaders that deserve my children.
Mm-hmm.
And and that is kind of a mission of mine, is that
Yeah.
ending toxic leadership and then promoting it through transformational leadership. You said something and I'd love to kind of tie it back to leadership, is why do you think veterans and leaders need to be aware of trauma and mental health? And mental health is such an epidemic in the military. I had a I could say off more names than I should,
Mhm.
of soldiers that either tried to commit suicide or committed suicide. If you could kind of dig into that.
So there was a stud. So there's a great book I would recommend, which is like "The Body Keeps the Score." I have that book right
Mm,
here in front of me by Wessel van der Kolk, right? MD. He's done groundbreaking research, and then there's another. I'll share more resources like "Drama of the Gifted Child" by Alice Miller. As these are two books, but particularly on veterans, the
yeah,
and the combat soldiers, that when they come back, sometimes their families are frightened,
yeah,
their wives go through depression and they are disconnected, the children, and then they're disconnected and associate their trauma. Sometimes you are like repressing those memories, or sometimes you're actively thinking like there is this war going on and I'm going to solve it, right? And
yeah.
sometimes so they are not leading that connected life. And so there was a study done. I think the book talks about since 2001, more Americans have been killed in at the hands of the family or partner than actually the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. And that
Mm,
is, there's something wrong with that, right? Like we need to like there's and then there was a study in the late 90s by CDC and Kaiser Permanente, where they studied the relationship, adverse childhood experiences. And adverse childhood experiences, there are 10 categories, like, between abuse and neglect and family dysfunction. Um, so you can almost like go through the list of, hey, have you had sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect, or any kind of mental illness in somebody in your home, or like incarcerated parents, or any kind of separation or divorce. And basically that has an impact on your brain's wiring in the long term and your health outcomes. So if your A score, let's say, is more than, you know 4 or higher, right? um, you could have like you are 4.5 times more likely to have depression, and 12
mm,
times more likely to have suicidal thoughts, right? So this wasn't on combat veterans, this study, but then you add to that the additional findings on, being in war and like seeing so much of brutality and not being
yeah,
able to heal that. The all the PTSD that people encounter, like we haven't looked at their early childhood as well. So when you compound all that does have a real cost in people's life, right? So I think that is why it's important that, like, we are able to talk about these problems, and not just from a perspective of, hey, like top down therapy, right, where they can process the trauma, but also teaching them how to be in their body, like the danger that happened in the past, but they are here in present and now. How do we, connect, right? So it's a combination of things to which we can do that, the healing, but it's just so important um, that we break that cycle.
mm. I was thinking of, so there's a concept of 22. So 22 soldiers a day commit suicide. And if you think about it from just a statistical number, and I know I'm probably off, so I'm going to swag. I can't
Yeah,
cuss on here, but a serious, wild
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
6,000 to 7,000 soldiers died in probably Iraq and Afghanistan during the entire 12 years. Take that number of 22, times it by 365. That's a
Mhm.
little over 8,000. Now times that by 12 years. I think we're over there more than that, but I'll just say 12.
Mhm.
That's 100,000 lives.
Yeah.
100,000 lives were taken, not because of a combat operation, not because of enemy fire, but because I believe they had a leader that could have helped them and
They
shaped
didn't.
them.
Hmm.
And then I go back to a time when I was at JBLM. We just got back from a deployment. It was a pretty rough deployment.
Yeah.
We were doing a 5K run through DuPont, just outside of the gates of JPLM. And they had every single one of the soldiers in their run.
Yeah.
It's just tough
Feel
when you
that. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Joseph Stalin says, "What's the difference between one person and a million? Just a number." I think that's the beauty about what makes us, like the United States, the Army, so great
Hmm.
because no one's a number, everyone's a face.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Just be with that emotion, Josh. It's like the work we do, and then what we've gone through. Like we store so much of that, right? So from a you touched on something which I want to double down. Like in military specifically, we give these young people a purpose, right? We are here to save it, and thank goodness for that service. But I think where we fail, right, is also then these people, we need to help them, right, like toughing it up. And sometimes,
Yeah.
like, I think until recently the awareness of PTSD probably was more like medicine or other things, like just giving like when is the time that you need to interject and say that no, this life is important. And
Yeah.
because it's not just that one soldier dying, but it is also their families, and trauma doesn't just
All
affect
the
one
people
person,
that it
other
impacts.
people, right, the morale of others. So I think it's a part of, like, even, and I bring it, of course there's a place for war and everything, but there is
Yeah.
also a place in, like, how do we, like, create a world where we don't need to send young men and women to fight and kill, because we have gotten better and better at killing each other in the
Yeah.
world than actually enjoying this beautiful life. And I think that is where there is work from a leadership perspective in all aspects, right, even in military, in political leadership. And this is not a show on politics, and
Yeah.
also, like, but the reality is these policies, and how we make decisions at the power at the top, they affect everybody's lives,
Hmm.
right?
No, I think that is 100% beautiful, and I think it's the first time I actually got teary-eyed on the podcast, so thanks for helping me kind of work through that. It's powerful when you think of, the numbers, and you actually start thinking about how many people took their lives because of trauma or mental illness, and then seeing the faces. And I just picture running, across the US, and there's enough placards for every single soldier, and you're seeing all those faces. And now, that son or that daughter, well, they had a family.
Mhm.
Maybe they had children. And how does that impact that family and that next generation? And what you're doing is it's needed and it's powerful. So I kind of want to keep going through, where you currently are right now on your leadership journey. What are you doing right now to to really capture your mission and to achieve that 100 million lives?
Oh, absolutely. So I am really doing a lot of speaking, right? Speaking,
Mm,
like in podcasts, in particular from business perspective, also in organizations and forums where leaders are, because I believe, this I had this hypothesis a few years ago, right, as I was going through my own journey, that I had a list of, like, ideas I had listed on a piece of paper, like, like I do a lot of journaling too. I have
yeah.
journals, written back to probably about 25, 30 years ago now, and I look back,
Wow.
like, yeah, I have some things that I used to write in when I was 16 and 17, and I periodically find things, and I'm like, wow, like I wrote that, like, I copied that, right? So I'm on and one of the things I had written, that idea that I kept coming back to, like, yes, I could teach children, or I could do all these things, I could create things, but why are adults quiet? Like,
Mm,
why do people that go through that, whether it's in, men, like having mental health issues, or from military combat, or like executives in companies, like, why? Like, because I knew there were more people, right? So I had this vision that I'm going to create this mastermind, or like a place where I can hold hand of like 100 women like me, powerful, like cross like banking, finance, technology, like the fields that have been associated. And this was around the time Me Too was going on overall, and I'm like, why are people talking about other external sexual abuse, and not nobody at home? Why are we so much like our anger is so much outward and not internally when we know the statistics? So
Yeah.
right now, really what I am working on is creating that environment, like mastermind through coaching, a community of women leaders. I'm open to coaching men too, but I think there's so much of shame and things, people sometimes don't come forward, right? But I
Yeah.
am equally aware of some powerful men, like who are doing that work. So really a community of women who I can help in shifting their identity from shame, blame, and guilt to really feeling whole and integrated and leading connected lives. So that's one area that I'm focused on through coaching. The other, within organizations, as I do more of my consulting, the speaking, it's really around creating trauma informed work cultures, because there's so much that's happened in the last 3 years. It's the sexual abuse was like a hidden endemic, like going on for years, right? Decades.
Hidden and I love
Pandemic.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, and on top of that, add to that 2 years of like pandemic, and given that 90% of the cases, the abuse happens by somebody, lot more, and then the war and
Mm,
movement, like these are like more conducive to creating situations that are perfect for abuse, where abuse thrives, right?
yeah.
So and then all the now the economic downturns, the tech layoffs and stuff, right? So I want to amplify my work by also informing some of the larger organizations to make sure that the leaders are aware, because I believe, like you talked about toxic work cultures, I believe a lot of people at the top in some companies, and many companies are also driving from that place of fear, like, and
Yeah.
control, and that is not like, the workplaces were not designed for women and children of for tomorrow. I'll just end with that, right? So my vision is also like doing a lot of the speaking, and hopefully through that, some leaders can, who are conscious and who see that this way of operating is not working for them, they become aware and create those benefits or work structures, like, or support for mental health, or for families. They can do that. And who I am becoming, I'm becoming an ambassador for really creating also policies that are really family, that invest in, for example, sex education, right?
Mm.
That invest in things that are needed for um, for reducing that harm, right? So that's who I'm becoming.
So I was at a church sermon. Chris Hodges said this, and it's so true. I think if your why is big enough, it demands a response. And so I think people like yourself who pushes out and sets these big, bold goals, this big, bold vision that inspires, and I think both scares you, because mine inspires me, but it scares me in a way. Because, well, now I made a verbal contract with myself and I shared it with the world. I'm
Yeah.
going to impact 1 million veterans in the next 10 years. Well, now I have to produce. At least that's
Mhm.
kind of my mentality, and I think it's so true. And you said something that I think is very important, and I want to make sure that it kind of go back to is of fear. Toxic leaders have a high level of fear. They're afraid of delegating to their team because they don't trust their team. They're afraid of giving up control. And I think they just fear that they may not be needed. I really think some of the leaders that I had throughout my career that operated from that stance of fear weren't necessarily poor leaders, but they truly believed that maybe I wasn't good enough, like them in their mind. I'm not good enough to be a leader, so I cannot display any weakness. I have to be strong,
Mhm.
and I have to come off as ruthless, and I have to create an aura of fear, because then they'll know I'm incompetent. And I think that's where great leaders that are transformational, like yourself, what I like to call POW, purposeful, accountable leader kind of operate from is they eat that humble pie, right? And then they're able to ask a question like, I know I'm not the subject matter expert. How team, how can we find a solution to this and let me pick it? There's a great metaphor that I always go back to is that leaders are like a lake. And I do not know how to do everything, but I
Mhm.
understand all the tools at my disposal. So a mile wide and a foot deep. I am a lake.
Mhm.
People on my team are whales. They're a mile deep and a foot wide. They're the ones that provide me subject matter expertise and opinions and then allow me to be decisive and engage. So and you totally stole my other question I was gonna ask. Is like, 5 to 10 years from now, kinda where do you see yourself? But I think you kinda summed that up. I would love to, before we get to the final show segment, throughout your entire leadership journey, how has your leadership philosophy changed? And I guess I'll kinda define that a little bit more, is that I believe everyone has a leadership philosophy and it matures throughout time. And I kind of go to mine as it's a house of leadership, a metaphorical home that we find a foundation on and that we build. And then over time, our house grows and grows and grows and grows and becomes more firm. How has your house of leadership matured over the years?
So the more time I've spent on this planet, right, and different, experiences, I have come to realize that my identity is very fluid. I am not
Mm,
as attached to anything. I feel like, I'm growing in many different ways about trying and testing things. But at the same time, from a leadership perspective, the core philosophy for me is I truly believe people can change. People can change. So,
yeah.
like growth mindset, right? Like just because somebody acted in this way in the past doesn't mean that they will act always. You can't, past doesn't predict the future. But but I also am wise to know that one time might be just this thing, second time, but third is like you don't get a chance, right? So
Yeah.
not so with me. Um and it has evolved in a way that I've been fortunate to have some really great leaders who've given like a lot of feedback earlier in my career and helped me shape who I am. But I
Mm,
also worked for a leader who at one point would reward people for growth mindset, and then they would ask me in private who in my team had most native intelligence. And I didn't even know what that meant, right? So I was like, I would guess, I'm like, oh, you're asking who has more IQ or who's more smart or whatever. And here's this person. And obviously that person was not in their definition of leadership like leader.
mm,
So it's so you operate around such people and you realize over time like what your core philosophy is. And for me, my core philosophy is that people are capable of change.
mm,
But then you do need to, they drop crumbs of their behavior and how they have acted, and that gives you a clue into who they really are. So don't listen to the talk, but like just see what they are doing. That will teach you about people, right? And I am a big reader of people and how they act and how they show up, and including me. Like I think I spend more time Josh, like analyzing my own leadership than
yeah.
other people's, quite honestly.
Yeah. I do the same thing. I think it took me 6 months for me to write out my house of leadership. Because it's so hard to kind of pin down like what makes you you and what's the common threads kind of throughout your entire life. And it all comes down to, I think, the fundamental thing between a toxic leader and a transformational leader is just one thing. And it's one thing that is so overlooked in today's society. And it's thinking. You
Mhm.
have to think. So I created an acronym stop. I'm an acronym master.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
silence your mind, take a tactical pause, observe, and then pursue purposefully. And I think if we can learn to slow down and truly think and reflect, especially on ourselves, then that helps us shape our beliefs, and our beliefs begin to manifest themselves in the actions that we do every single day, the words that we say, the intentionality that we bring with our team. And then that intentionality starts to build our reputation, it starts defining our character. And at the end, it has formed our legacy of how people remember us. And it all starts up here. It all starts with thinking. That's a
Yeah.
beautiful answer.
Yeah, and then one thing as you were talking about, I think I would add one thing, which is a fundamental belief that I have about leadership and people is like, f- I believe this universe is safe and is abundant, where a lot of
Mm,
people can coexist and they can be unique and they don't need to follow each other's path. And there's
yeah.
plenty for me, there's plenty for you, there's plenty for everybody. That's my fundamental belief, right?
Yeah.
So I and which means that I have my path, but I'm going in a certain path. Not everybody's going in that path, right? But these paths, like there are different ways they connect and they make us better, right? So I think in a leadership, like my core philosophy is knowing my own values. I value my learning,
Mm,
that's one of my top values: compassion, courage, power, and connection, right? These are my top values. The business for my business, serve, all of these are like really key values, including service and having that abundance mindset. So my leadership philosophy really rests on a lot of these components that I talked about, and with really learning and growth mindset, if you will, about the world in general.
yep. You said a key word. And I think throughout the entire journey, that's what it's about. So leadership is a journey, life is a journey. It's not a destination. We never arrive. So goals can be a trap. Setting goals in itself can be a trap. It's not about achieving the goals. It's not about knocking down the target. It's about who you're going to be on the other end, the growth mindset. And growth is the key word there. That's beautiful. So we're kind of getting to the final show segment. I call it the killer bees. So be brief, be brilliant, be present, be gone. It's the same four questions that I ask everyone on the Tells of Leadership podcast. If you're ready, we'll kick it off.
Ready? Let's
All
go
right.
for
So,
it.
what do you believe separates an ordinary leader from an extraordinary leader?
Appreciation.
Appreciation. Hmm. Number two, what is one resource? And I know you said a lot great books already that you would recommend to our listeners.
I already recommended books. I would
Yeah.
recommend breathing and mindfulness throughout the day. Take two
Mm,
minutes, morning, midday, at night. Start there, start small, be consistent.
I love that. So, question three, if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be and why?
I would give her lots of hugs and say, be more playful and life is just great and
Like,
explore, right?
instantly got happy with that
Yeah.
question. I love that. So hugs. So because I'm a ninja with acronyms. So humility, understanding, gratitude, and being a servant leader.
Oh
I
my
love that.
goodness.
So yeah, I think leading with hugs, and I literally have that in my command philosophy is I lead with hugs, and everyone always looks at me because I'm 6'2",
Uh-huh.
almost 200 pounds, covered in tattoos. Like, who's this crazy guy saying he's leading with hugs? And then I kind of explain it. All right, I'm breaking my rules. All right, final question: how can our listeners find you, and how can they add value to you?
Sure. So they can find me on LinkedIn, my website, as well as I can share my email. But you will find me on LinkedIn as Kalpashree Gupta. It's a mouthful. I'll spell it for you: Kalpashree, and Gupta, Gupta, right? That's on LinkedIn. And then Knekxt is my website. So that's knekxt.com. And I'm also on TikTok. So with the same company name, Knekxt.com. And how can they add value? So I shared the statistics, right? Or many of your listeners might be parents. They might have encountered sexual abuse either as child, or sometimes unfortunate things happen everywhere, right? So if they encountered this, I want them to know that it's not their fault and they
Mm,
are safe and it was in the past. Um, if they know somebody or they need help, they can help by creating awareness and sharing about more information about me with their friends or family or others, to get in touch if I can help them shift their identities and really live fully, right, live joyfully. For coaching, or if the other part, they can add value if they know like any strategic partnerships, or where we can, like, I'm not going to reach 100 million likes in like 10 years by my
Yeah.
own. Like, I that's not the intention is to have more partnerships, right, where more people become aware. So if they know of any opportunities, to create that impact, I would love to hear from them. I always do some coffee chats, so I welcome anyone reaching out with any brainstorming ideas.
I love that. Kalpa, this has been an amazing conversation. It's funny because I look at the timer. We've been having a conversation for over an hour, and I feel like we just started. So I might have you back on the show. Thank you so much for being intentional with your time. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much, Josh. I love the conversation, and certainly let's talk again sometime. Have a lovely
Absolutely.
evening. Bye.
You too.